Alright, I would have a proper introduction, but you've read the title and there are a million of these on YouTube. Basically, we are just counting how many legitimate sins Jeremy from CinemaSins actually mentions, seemingly by just reading off of IMDb trivia and goofs, but you get the general idea. So I'm just going to set some ground rules. Rule 1. If it's criticism which relies on information which is false, incomplete, or deliberately misleading, then the sin does not count. Rule 2. If it's a joke which relies on information which is false or incomplete, then the sin does not count. Rule 3. A joke can be misleading for the sake of comedy, but not excessively so to the point of being in violation of Rule 2. Rule 4. The only time a sin can be repeated is if it happens again later in the film. If the flaw has already been pointed out in the scene currently being discussed, then it will not be counted towards the sin counter and will be counted towards the milk counter, as in they are trying to milk the same sin multiple times. If you point it out once, fair enough. If you're pointing out the same mistake in the same scene multiple times and attributing multiple sins to it, then that is milking one singular sin to inflate your sin count, which, that is against Rule 4. Rule 5. Missed sins will be pointed out if Jeremy has sinned that particular area of the film. So if there is a adjacent sin that he has missed, then that will be tracked as a separate missed sins counter.
One minute and 41 seconds of Star Trek Into Darkness with some admittedly great music. But damn, does this movie think it's 2001?
Alright, Sin 1. You know what? When I first watched this, I thought there was a display issue with my TV. I'll agree, this is a genuine, legitimate sin, so we're off to a good start. And also the music, the music is really good in this film, and I'm glad Jeremy mentions this. I'm sure he'll mention it consistently throughout the film. As an aside, he doesn't. He really doesn't. Anyway, +1 genuine sin.
Followed by a minute and 20 seconds of nothing but credits that do nothing for nobody.
This is delivered as a joke, but when you examine the contents of the joke, there is no humour. Credits exist to give thanks to the people who worked on the film. You'll be hard-pressed to find a film that doesn't have any form of credits whatsoever. I mean, hell, even video games have credits. Yeah, I'm not really sure what Jeremy is going for here. This is just the running thing where CinemaSins sins the fact that all films have credits. Repetition doesn't make something funny when it wasn't funny in the first place. Variations of a running joke can be funny, but just repeating the same thing again and again doesn't make it funny. Doesn't make it a running joke, it just makes it a thing you keep mentioning. But yeah, I'm not going to count this one because ultimately it's technically in violation of Rule 2. If it's a joke, it relies on information which is false or incomplete. This is false. Credits do have an actual function. I'll be honest with you, I would have given it a pass if it was structured like an actual joke. I know comedy is subjective, but there's some objectivity as to the quality of the joke in terms of structure and delivery, and this doesn't really carry through. So I'm not going to count this one as a genuine sin.
Is that it? Useless. Null point.
Hey, I never realized The Next Generation totally stole their theme song from the original Star Trek movie's opening credit score.
Again, this one's delivered as if it's a joke, but, this is just trivia. This is just Star Trek trivia. He has just opened up IMDb. There's no setup, there's no punchline, it just falls under observation. Could you call it comedic observation? Is it amusing as an observation? Is it interesting? I'll be honest, not really, because anyone who knows anything about Star Trek will hear that theme and they will immediately think that too. So I get that you're pointing it out, and I also understand that comedy is subjective, but I don't even know if this is meant as a joke or a genuine sin, if I'm honest, because if it is a genuine sin, then it's not, it's just trivia. And if it is a joke, I can't tell, so I'm not going to count this. So despite the initial strong start, we're still sat on one genuine sin.
None point.
Also, Robert Wise? You mean West Side Story and Sound of Music Robert Wise? Seems like the kind of guy I'd get to direct my science fiction movie.
Okay, so Sins 4, to be fair, this joke actually has a proper structure. It has a middle, it has a start, and it has an end. It has all three. I mean, I named them out of sequence, but it has a setup and it has a punchline. And both of which actually make sense. And, the setup leads into the punchline. And the joke leads into the film and is relevant. And that is, as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty good going for Jeremy. And yeah, we're poking fun here at the fact that Robert Wise isn't a good choice for a science fiction film given his previous experience. And that's really funny. That is very funny. Until you realize that Robert Wise directed The Day the Earth Stood Still and The Andromeda Strain before directing Star Trek The Motion Picture. So this joke relies on information which is... it's not technically false. Robert Wise did direct West Side Story and The Sound of Music, but it is very incomplete and extremely misleading, so that is a flagrant violation of Rule 2, I'm afraid. So we're still stuck on one sin. I am going to say, considering this film was absolute production hell, I don't think ragging on the director is really a, what's the best way to describe this? A good move. You can slate a lot of stuff in this film. I'll be honest, this film should be like shooting fish in a barrel, but somehow you've managed to pick a sin that is not only not applicable, but is one of the few parts of this film where actually you read about what this guy had to put up with, the fact that this guy on multiple occasions wanted to quit this project just because of how much stress he was under, and you look at what ended up happening with the project and you think, actually, considering all the factors that he was dealing with, it ended up pretty good. It's not the best film in the world. It's not even the best Star Trek film, but it's not a massive pile of fecal matter. I've seen some real turkeys. I've seen Meek's Cut Off. That film was awful. That was so awful I actually gave it 5 stars because I wanted other people to experience how awful it was. It's probably one of my most favourite things I've done, if I'm honest. Anyway, there you go, Jeremy. You made a sin that was completely fabricated based on a lie, slagging off one of the people who actually made this absolute hellhole of a project turn out looking relatively okay. Jesus Christ, man. The fact that this film even happened at all and it didn't just get canned and never saw the light of day. I'd even go as far to say, if Robert Wise didn't actually pull this off, we wouldn't get a Star Trek 2. If that film never even reached release, let alone have a lukewarm reception, lukewarm reception from the general audience, Star Trek fans absolutely creamed themselves, but if that never happened, Star Trek would have just stayed as a 3-series TV show that got cancelled in 1969 and then got 2 seasons of an animated show, and that's it. And it would have stayed in the 60s and the early 70s. That's where it would have died. There's a lot to pick apart about this film, but throwing insults about the director that's not even correct, I'm not sure what the point of that one was, but fair enough, Jeremy. You do you. We're still on one genuine sin.
None point.
Here are 3 Klingon ships that, while capable of cloaking, are approaching this space thing uncloaked, which they definitely won't regret.
Jeremy, they don't regret this one. They don't. You see, they're not destroyed on their approach, so they don't regret not cloaking on their approach. They, in fact, approach entirely uncontested. They are not burdened by any form of hostile action on their approach. Their problems arise, for the Klingons, after they fire their initial volley, and then they start receiving return fire. That is when they start experiencing a degree of regret, not on their approach. Because cloaking on their approach, decloaking and then firing their volley, that wouldn't change the success of their mission. That wouldn't change the sequence of events, even slightly. The only thing it would achieve is increasing the animation budget somewhat. You can also say, in the original series, the only Klingon ships that we see cloak were the D7s that they gave to the Romulan Star Empire. So the first time we see a Klingon ship under the Klingon Empire in the Klingon Defense Force under the command of a Klingon captain manned by a Klingon crew, cloak is in Star Trek 3, the Brel, Krug's ship. That's the first time we see a ship cloak. Before that, it's not demonstrated in the franchise that they have the ability to cloak. Now, there's some debate about lore, about, retroactively when should they have been able to cloak in the timeline and how they got that technology. But in terms of the actual franchise, this was not an established ability for the Klingons. This was not an established technology the Klingons had. So not only is your point completely irrelevant in terms of internal logic just to this film, but actually externally to the lore of the actual franchise, it doesn't work either. So that's two solid reasons why this sin doesn't work. Still, no more genuine sins. We're still on one sin. Yeah, not such a great start anymore, Jeremy.
Tactical's actually standing by on future Afterburner arcade machines.
Sin 6. You know what? I like this. As a joke poking light fun at sci-fi props, it works quite well. I'm honestly surprised he didn't ask why these machines are rotating though, but aside from the obvious missed sin, I'm also surprised he isn't sinning the new Klingon design. He'd be wrong to, since it's explained in-universe multiple times, but I am surprised he didn't make that mistake. I mean, you could then sin the fact that there are multiple conflicting in-universe explanations for this, but none of those are actually present in this film, so you wouldn't really be able to sin it right here. So again, he didn't make that mistake. I am impressed, so credit where it's due. I am giving him that. I'm gonna have to give him a missed sin, but you know what? 2 genuine sins, 1 missed sin. We're on track. That's about 30% accuracy. Well, 33.3 recurring percent accuracy. 1 out of 3 sins. It's not great, but you know what? It's better than not getting any sins other than, the first one. So it can only get better from here.
Typical Klingon behavior. We don't know what this is, let's shoot it.
Sin 7. Yes, that is the definition of acting within character. We have established behaviors for these types of people. That sounds racist. This is a Klingon battle group. This is a Klingon captain on a Klingon warship from the Klingon Empire in the Klingon Defense Force. So it would be a little bit out of character if he approached this like a Ferengi or a Romulan or, a Starfleet captain. This is perfectly within character for all the information we know about the Klingon Empire. So, I mean, I'm gonna guess this is a joke here, because if this is genuine criticism and he wants Klingons to not behave like Klingons, that just doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense if he is joking, even though it's not explicitly a joke. You know what? If he is going to make jokes about Klingons being overly aggressive, it's a very old joke. It's not particularly original. I'm going to give him the point here because he kind of needs it, but I'm also going to say this joke has been, how do I phrase this? He has gone where many, many men have gone before and have done a much more entertaining job of doing so than Jeremy has in this particular instance. So, you know what? 3 genuine sins. I'm fine with that, but I'm also just going to leave this clip in here.
Because this belonged to you.
Hey, be careful with the dog. Come here, boy.
We found him on the Klingon homeworld. He was digging up azalea bushes, and we've just re-landscaped.
Sorry about that, but let's take care of it.
Well, yes. But next time it's intergalactic war, I vow we will destroy every molecule of the Federation.
That seems reasonable.
Jaws Trek.
Sin 8. These models look great. I mean, that nacelle has a crazy amount of detail. And also, yeah, I get the joke. It's okay, I guess. I mean, it falls a bit flat for me, but it's a joke that takes about 3 seconds to tell and they don't linger on it, so you know what, fair enough. But at least it's original. I'm happy to give you another point, Jeremy. I just wanted to tell everyone about the cool models and how I like the amount of detail that's in them. I think they look great.
Here's one of the fakest looking spacewalks in film history, and this movie came out almost a decade after 2001. This is unacceptable.
Sin 9. Yeah, this special effect looks kind of bad. I could go on about film budgets and, timelines and, filming techniques, but at the end of the day, this point is valid, if somewhat exaggerated for comedy. So, wait, hold on. He said almost a decade. 2001 Space Odyssey was released in May 1968. Star Trek The Motion Picture was December 1979. That's not almost a decade, Jeremy. That is more than a decade. This doesn't take away from Jeremy's point. I could be petty here and say this is incorrect information, but actually, you know what? It's fine. He's saying this special effect looks bad. He's comparing it to another film that released earlier, even though that film has entirely different filming circumstances. But the point he's making here is still fine. So I'm going to give him this, and I want it to be known that I am being fair, I'm trying to be fair. I'm making a conscious effort to be fair and not just deny Jeremy points for silly reasons. So yeah, 5 genuine sins. Well done, Jeremy.
That's more like it.
I have an exterior visual.
Of a fight taking place super far away? How?
Sin 10. Did you miss the establishing shot where we see they're on a station which looks like a giant satellite dish? In fact, the audio in this scene tells the viewer the station is called Epsilon 9. It's a communication station, and there's a fair amount of radio chatter, so it's likely the station has quite a decent range. Why do you think we see the little guy on a spacewalk? He's there for scale, to show us just how massive the station is. That's why even though the effect doesn't look great, they kept him in, because leaving him out means that the scale is ambiguous. That's why all Federation starships, or most of them at least, have a visible bridge on top of the saucer. Everyone points at it and says that's a massive tactical problem, and you're right, but the reason that's there is so the ship actually has scale. Scale is vital. And that's exactly what the spacewalk guy provides. And you might be thinking, okay, communication satellite, fair enough, but it's not a big sensor, is it? How are they seeing this footage? Well, the film literally says,
"Our sensor drone is intercepting this on quad L14.
Why are they monitoring this region of space, you ask?
That's within Klingon boundaries. Who are they fighting?
Commander Branch, I think. Commander? Captain? I don't know. Branch says. That Branch is the name of this guy, by the way. So it seems like there's a totally legitimate reason in universe for them to be monitoring this region of space, and it's completely feasible that a massive long-range communication station would be able to receive information from a faraway probe. So yeah, this sin does make sense, but only if you remove all the dialogue in the film explaining how this happens. I will actually just take this time, though, to say that they missed an obvious sin. So this Klingon captain is talking on a shaky camera here, so he's clearly in distress. They're shaking around, there's flashing lights going off everywhere, stuff like that. But then a minute or so later, we cut to him, and it's completely calm. He's very collected, he's very cool, and, he's not really shaken. None of them are shaken. There's no debris, there's nothing there. And we also see a bit later as well that the plasma torpedoes that alien entity fires does not cause a massive explosion. It doesn't leave any debris, and it doesn't cause any kind of shockwaves to any ships, nearby. So what's up with the shaky cam? What's going on here? And there is another sin as well. There are 3 ships in this Klingon task force. One of the ships gets destroyed, which is presumably what we're seeing here, but we don't really see how it gets destroyed, and we know that the method in which, or at least the very little information we do have about the destruction, is inconsistent with what we know about the alien weaponry. So we have a very weird circumstance in which the third ship, or first ship, depending on how you count them, dies, and we get a lot of inexplicable, inconsistent shaky cam, and that footage ends with the Klingon being thrown out of his chair, which, we cut we cut back and they're all fine and there's no real visible form of damage. There's no sparks going off, there's no fire, there's no, no one has like a little trickle of blood on their forehead or anything. All the superficial ways to show in which someone or the ship has taken damage. So yeah, I would say that's two missed sins. There might be explanations for those two, but it's not immediately apparent to me, and I don't think it's immediately apparent to most people in the audience, even with, excessive Star Trek knowledge. So yeah, I'd say, we've broken your streak of legitimate sins, unfortunately, so we're still stuck at 5 genuine sins, but we are adding 2 missed sins. Unfortunately, you missed that while you were sinning this part of the film and elected to sin something that was explicitly explained by the dialogue in the film. Yeah, sorry, Jeremy. 5 genuine sins, 3 missed sins.
Openness and democracy that have marked the history of this city. Amir missed me.
The Klingons are apparently fighting the ghost of the guitar guy from Mad Max Fury Road.
Sin 11. This is obviously a joke, but I do want to take this moment actually to talk about the blaster beam, which is the name of the instrument, because it's really cool. Here's some footage. The instrument was invented in the early 1970s, and originally it was made out of iron, but a certain Mr. Craig Huxley created one made out of aluminium for this film specifically. So that's how we get these really cool sound effects that kind of integrate themselves into the soundtrack very nicely. Also, on a very unrelated note, that is something that Greyhound does as well, and I really like this kind of, I don't know if it's a trope because it doesn't really happen that often, but I do like having certain sound effects that apply both to the soundtrack and to what's happening in the film. These two are kind of like bridged by this sound effect. I quite like that. I've linked a genuinely interesting video about the blaster beam in the description. I would recommend watching it because I found it quite interesting. Anyway, comedy is subjective, but structurally this is very clearly set up as a joke. It's not meant to be taken seriously. I just personally think it's not particularly funny, so you know what? I'm fine to give you this one, Jeremy. You're on 6 genuine sins and 3 missed sins, so you're actually performing a little bit above 50%. So that's an improvement. We're getting there.
That's good. Keep rolling. Keep rolling. I like that. That was a good answer, Bill.
The ball of electric energy headed towards the ship is best represented by a hexagon with 6 pegs extending off of it. This is when your computer has given up.
I'll be honest with you, Jeremy. I have to disagree with you on this one. This computer does quite a lot for the audience. It clarifies a lot of details about the battle as it happens. It clarifies the number of ships, the incoming threat. It shows the photon torpedo failing to stop the plasma torpedo. This is a really good use of clear in-universe visuals to reinforce the sequence of events for the audience. Is your complaint that they weren't way ahead of the time in terms of UI design principles? Is your point that this retro film has retro computers that have, by extension, retro UI design principles? This sin would hold up if the UI that's actually shown in the film was actually genuinely poorly designed. But honestly, it looks really clean, very clear, and it serves a real function for the audience. The film does create a nice, clear UI for the audience to understand what is going on and to reinforce spatially where everything is and sequentially how these events fit together. Not that it's a particularly difficult thing to understand anyway, but it does this without us really having to think about it, It's like it's subversive spoon feeding, and it's done so nicely that you don't even realize that that's the function which this is actually performing. And I think in terms of, and I'm going to say this again, I think this does boil down to the director. That's a phenomenal choice. I really like it, especially given the fact that we lose a Klingon ship off screen through some unexplained means. But I think that this computer does actually set the record straight somewhat, so it's not ambiguous how many ships there are. Yeah, I think this UI is brilliant. I love this computer. If you're going to sin the design here, how about we talk about the fact that it's not shown how this 2D screen can distinguish 3D information. It would be a complete nitpick that doesn't apply to the film whatsoever, but it would technically be true. When you think about it, a spaceship should have effective ways to visualize 3D information. You know, not only is this sin incorrect, not only is this sin bashing a UI that is perfectly fine, doesn't look terrible, and serves a real narrative function, he actually misses a legitimate criticism here that he could employ. Not one that would genuinely affect the quality of the film. It would be a very minor nitpick, but it would still technically be true. So I'm going to top this one up. We're still on 6 genuine sins, and we're on now 4 missed sins.
Strike uno, Decepticons!
This glowing ball of explosiveness is way slower than the one that took down the other ship a minute ago.
Sin 13. Firstly, this isn't explosive. This isn't a ball of explosiveness. It doesn't explode. It doesn't cause explosions. Jeremy, does this look like an explosion? Secondly, you've not provided any sort of comparison in your video claiming that this is a sin. If you look at the shots as they happen, the torpedo actually looks like it's traveling about the same speed in all of the shots that we see across both of the attacks. So this sin is that despite appearing to travel the same speed, it takes longer for the second torpedo to hit the IKS AMAR. Not that this torpedo is inexplicably traveling slower than the first one. So I'm not going to count this as a missed sin, but I'm not going to count this as a valid sin either, since what you describe is not accurate to the actual film error. If you had described it correctly, then yeah, this would be a genuine sin. I feel like the line between nitpicking semantics of how you've presented it is not clearly defined in this video, but there is a line here, and I understand that line might feel a little bit arbitrary, but what he has described is not the actual sin in this one particular instance. But at the same time, I am trying to be generous. I'm just not going to be generous here and give him the point, because I think he's too far off the mark for the point to be granted. But conversely, I'm not going to say he's missed the sin. He's clearly trying to get at it, he's just not successfully described it. And he's also not successfully put any sort of actual comparison footage in the video where he explicitly says one is slower than the other. If you're going to say that, you need to provide actual proof that that is the case, or at least explain to a greater extent what the point is. Because if you just say that without providing the footage, we just take you at your word. Why would you not provide, well, I say why would you not provide footage? Is by any chance the reason you didn't provide footage the fact that the footage itself proves that the point doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense, unless you really think about it and give it a very liberal definition of the terms you've described. Anyway, right, we're falling a little bit below 50%, but let's see if we can bump that up.
Angels of ministers in mercy.
God in heaven.
Victory fart.
Sin 14. Fine, I guess. It's a valid one. It's not particularly original. And again, humour is subjective.
Stop us now.
Roofing initiated.
What the fuck is happening right now?